introduce yourself and start in on your basic training? Okay, I'm rolling. Go.
I'm Jim Tracy. I was drafted in August of 1942, and we went to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, down near Worcester, and we had basic training. And they didn't even have guns for us, so we had brooms to march with. And it seemed to go by pretty fast, and pretty soon they were interviewing us, and they gave us an IQ test, and it seems that I was good enough, or had enough, although I didn't have high school, I had enough intelligence to go to an AM school. So I was shipped down to Amarillo, Texas, and the base was so new that we had to eat outside. The only building we had was the mess hall and kitchen, and we slept in tents, and I learned for 6 months all about B-17s. And then we went to the factory up in Seattle, and we checked out the airplane that we were studying, and I had the good fortune of starting it up, and I went up on one mission that went up to 42,500 feet. It took us 3.5 hours to get up there. And then from there we went to aerial gunnery school in Las Vegas, and 5 weeks of gunnery training there, and then we were assigned to crews of 10 in phase training at Blythe, California. And after phase training, we went to Maine, and from Maine we flew to Newfoundland, to Iceland, to Scotland, to London, and in London we were assigned to the 94th Bomb Group 331st Squadron. It was in the Midlands in England, the farm country, and most of the time the weather was beautiful except when it was raining, and it rained every day. And we started our missions almost immediately, and one of the places we went to was called Bastard in France, right in the center of France. And it was a secret installation that had 16-foot reinforced concrete ceilings. And we dropped 2,000-pounders on it, and it didn't even put a dent in it. So later on, the British hit it with 16,000-pound bomb blockbusters, and it still didn't penetrate the ceiling, but it killed all the people inside and wrecked all the machinery. And we stayed pretty much in France for the next couple of missions, and then we had one to the Focke-Wulf factory in Mariensburg in East Prussia. And it was a long mission, and we didn't have enough fuel to fly it at the regular altitude of 28,000, so we violated Sweden's neutrality and flew the mission at 11,000 feet. We bombed the factory, and after we left the factory, we were going back over Danzig in Poland, and while we were going over the harbor of Danzig, the Tirpitz, which is a pocket battleship, German, was down in the harbor, but they didn't fire at us. And I'll tell you, the big ocean liners looked like rowboats beside them those warships. But unfortunately, another element of the 8th Air Force was bombing from 28,000 feet, and they were bombing down through our formation because we were flying at 11,000 feet. And anyhow, on the mission, we lost one engine, and the pilot feathered that, but we still got along okay on 3 engines, and just boosted the manifold pressure a little bit. Anyway, we flew over the North Sea after we left Sweden, and flew back to base in Midlands in England. And when we got down, we checked the gasoline, and there was about 30 gallons of gas left, just enough to circle the airport one more time. And then we were briefed at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were all ready to go just about daylight. And they sent up 3 supernumerary on each mission, so that any plane that had any trouble would be able to drop out, and they'd still have 21 planes in the formation. And then come the one I remember the best, the one to South Germany. But one bad feature, we had been briefed for that mission 3 days in a row. Everybody and his kid brother knew where we were going, and even the waitress downtown knew we were going to that mission. So the Germans had time to move in the flak trains, and they had 155 millimeter guns on flat cars, and they would go off like boom, whereas the 88s, which they usually used, would just go boom, boom, boom. And we had to go to Schweinfurt. It was a ball bearing factory in South Germany, and we had, we must have had at least 100 fighters attack us on the way in, and we lost 2 engines, 2 of 4 engines. 1 and 2 were out, and they were feathered, but we were still staying with the formation. But on the way back, we developed, one of the fighters got to us. I don't think we were hit by a lot of flak, but it didn't do too much damage, no pertinent damage. And on the way back, we had to leave the formation because we developed the fire and back a number 2 tank. And although it was serious, the real problem was I had taken the gas out of the tank, 1 and 2 tanks, and put it in 3 and 4 because they were the engines that were running. Anyway, when I told the pilot that we had a fire and back in number 2, he put it in a dive, and from 28,000 feet, he pulled it out at 3,000. And it almost sucked out the fire, but when we leveled off, it sucked back into the wing, and then we had the fire going back to the tail. And I was afraid the gasoline tanks were, they were self-sealing tanks, but if there was gasoline in there, it would just come out from the bullet holes and just burn. But with the empty tanks over there, we were afraid it would blow our wing off. So I went back to the waist compartment, and one of the waist gunners had a piece of flak in his foot. So the other waist gunner and the tail gunner threw him out with his parachute, of course, and then they went out the waist compartment. And when I went through the radio room, the radio man was sitting there with his head in his arms, and so I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Come on, Buckley, we're going out." I had forgot that I was with a strange crew. I didn't know the radio man's name. And so I straddled the Bombay, and before I jumped, or before I straddled the Bombay, I looked down in the bombardier's compartment, and the bombardier and navigator were already gone. And I straddled the Bombay, and the pilot and co-pilot were just coming into the Bombay, and so was the radio man. So I pulled my legs together, and down I went. And I got the surprise of my life when, after I leave the slipstream of the airplane, there's no sensation of falling. Absolutely none. But you're tumbling, and comes the blue, which is the sky, and the brown, which is the earth. And when I saw trees on the ground, I figured I was getting too close, so I pulled the ripcord, and the pilot chute come out and waved back and forth, and it didn't look as if it was going to come out. So fortunately, I had a chest pack, so I grabbed it and gave it a tug, and then it popped, and I went up once and down once, and I was on the ground.
Stop a minute. We're missing a couple of things I'd really like to hear from you. You're going to get into the fact that you were wounded in this incident.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. But first of all, could we back up and could you tell us what your daily briefing experience was? I mean, when did your day start? And kind of like so that we know what life was like for you on a given day. Can you give us a little bit of that? And also, I'd like you to remind us that this is daylight bombing.
Yeah.
And you're getting your
Well,
shot up pretty damn good.
5 o'clock in the morning for the briefing, and then at dawn we took off. I already said that.
Okay.
I don't think I know what you mean. The briefing, well, I could tell you details like the S2, which is the intelligence department, told us there would be little flak at the target. We knew that everybody knew that they would have time to move the railroad guns in. But S2 didn't know that, but the waitress in town knew it. And so the Germans knew it. Well, that's just my supposition. I don't know what to tell you about the briefing.
I'm sorry, maybe I got you confused. All right, now you're in is this your 7th mission that you're shot down?
8th.
Your 8th? You want to describe to us how you were injured? Didn't you tell me you were shot in the head and you blacked out for a while?
Yeah.
You want to pick that up?
No. After we left the target, ready?
Oh, yeah, we're going.
After we left the target, it seems like the Germans were using everything that they had, because there was Dorniers, 2 Dorniers come down, and they had been outfitted with about 5 guns on each wing. They had been made into fighters, and they were really medium bombers. And when they'd come in, for some reason or other, when they'd finished their run, they would zoom on up, and it sounded like a hail on a tin roof when they would attack you. There were just so many bullets, and one of the bullets went through the plexiglass in the back of my head, and I got a bullet in the back of the head right in back of my left ear. And I was bleeding pretty good, and it did not, I think it knocked me out because I remember thinking, open your eyes, open your eyes. And then all of a sudden I opened my eyes, and my nose was the only thing that hurt, where I had gone forward and hit the sight. The sight was right in front of me. And so I stepped down from the turret and told the co-pilot to get up in my position. And he said he didn't know how to operate the turret. So I went down in the bombardier section, and the navigator started putting a bandage on my head, and his hands froze up because it was 53 below zero, and he put them down in his pants to warm them up, and I heard over his intercom a lot of excitement, so I knew something was happening up there. So I left without the bandage and went back up into the turret, and the hole in the plexiglass was letting the cold air in, and that was an act of God, I guess, because it froze the blood on the wound, and I didn't bleed anymore till I got down to the ground. But these, I had been using only one gun, but when the Dorniers were coming in, I put on the other gun, and it seemed like they peel off up when they finished the run, and I would pepper them with the twin 50s, and I actually cut the gun turret away from the nose of the medium bomber. And the other one, I don't know, I think he got away. But soon after that is when we developed the firearm back in number 2 engine. And then we had to bail out.
When you got on the ground,
Huh?
when you got on the ground finally,
And when I hit the ground, the parachute opened, fortunately, and when I hit the ground, I hit it hard, but I was on my feet, and it bounced me over onto my shoulders, and then when I stood up, I remembered having been told to get rid of the parachute as soon as possible. So I bundled it up, and I couldn't find any place to hide it, so I tucked it behind a bush, and I looked at some people who were up perhaps 100 feet above me on the hill I was on, walking by, and about 50 feet from me was a German soldier leaning on his rifle. And I remembered that in high school the sister said, when you reach an impossible situation, turn it over to the Lord and see what happens. So I looked up at the sky and I said, my head is bleeding like a stuck pig, and I'm in enemy territory, and at the time I didn't know where. And I said, well, I guess it's up to you, Lord, whatever you decide. And then I turned around and ran downhill on the path that was in the woods, and I saw a bunch of leaves off to the right in a hollow part of the ground, and there was a lot of leaves there, so I got down and buried myself in the leaves and went to sleep. And when I woke up, it was dark, and there was a pinpoint of light way off in the distance, and I went toward it, and I was bumping into trees and everything because it was so black out there. But I finally got into this place, and this big dog come growling at me, but then he come to the end of his chain, so I breathed a sigh of relief, and I went to the back door of a farmhouse where the light was, and knocked on the door, and a woman answered the door, and then tried to close it when she saw who was at the door, and I pushed my way in, and there's a pounding on the stairs behind the door, and the door busted open, and here two guys were come into the room. It was the French underground having a meeting up in the attic. They took me across the field into a barn and gave me some civilian clothes, painted my shoes black, and took me to a house that was something like a boarding house. And there was 5 members of my crew already in this house. And they told me that the plane had gone down and landed itself on the automatic pilot and sat there and burned. And the German Gestapo had reported that 4 bodies were found in the wreck, no, they had captured 4 men, and 6 bodies were found in the wreck. Well, at this time, there was 6 of us in the same room, and there's only 10 in the crew, so that accounted for 6, and 4 had been captured. So I assumed that they had reported the 6 dead to cover themselves with their high command. So the following day, I woke up to the sound of German soldiers drilling, and they were right outside the house I was living in and staying in, and I just knew they were coming for me, but they walked on by, and then the following day, they took me to a town, I don't know where the heck it was, but it was across the border. And I don't know what country it was, but it probably was Switzerland. And there was a man there with a very fast automobile who had access to all of the countries in the neighborhood, and he got permission to go into these countries from the German officers. He would supply them with fancy stockings and fancy wines and things like that, and in exchange they'd give him a passport to go into different countries, and he would use that for smuggling. And he took my dog tags, and he took me and the bombardier to a town called Creil, C-R-E-I-L, in central France. And while we were on our way going there, we'd run across German patrols, and I guess when we'd see the patrols, we'd kind of stare at them, and he says, "Don't look at them, don't pay any attention, it just makes them nervous." So finally, in Creil, they introduced me to a guy who owned a boiler factory, who just happened to have a friend who was a doctor. And so we went over to his house, and we went to the hospital where he took x-rays of my head, and then we went back to his house, and he explained that he didn't know who he could trust down at the hospital, so he didn't dare operate down there. So with his wife handing him the tools, and three of his neighbors holding me down, he took the bullet out, and he was apologizing for not having any anesthetic, but it was all quite bearable. It hurt, but not too bad. Of course, the bullet had been in there for 2 days, and he asked me if I wanted it for a souvenir, and I said, no thanks. And when he started stitching up my head, well, one of the things he had to do was cut a piece of meat the size of a quarter out of my head because he said it was gangrenous. And then he stitched it up, and when he was tightening up the stitches, it felt like two giant hands were crushing my head. Then it took three of them to hold me down. And after he was finished, I felt a lot better, and they took me over to the Boilermaker's house, where he introduced me to his wife, and his wife just happened to be an English teacher in their local high school. And so they showed me the bathroom and filled it up with hot water, and I took a bath, and my clothing, my underwear was just sopping wet with blood, and I cleaned myself up, and they gave me some pajamas, and I spent the next 5 weeks in bed smoking my pipe. And the Boilermaker had brought me about a pound of, I don't know, some kind of tobacco, but it was stronger than any tobacco I've had in the United States. Anyway, during the 5 weeks, toward the end of the 5 weeks, the woman and I used to go for a walk in the afternoon, and we passed an airport that had, ME-109s, and one day when we were passing the airport, the ME-109s were taken off, and flying overhead at 28,000 feet was a formation of B-17s, and I wanted so hard. It seemed like as if it wouldn't be much trouble for them guys to come down and land one of those planes and pick me up. But of course, I was foolish thinking. And after I got well, they sent me to another town. I don't know the name of it, but the man of the house was a railroad worker, and he had a daughter 1 year older than me, and she was learning English in school. So we spent our time, she'd try to teach me French, and I'd try to teach her English, and we'd go for a walk, and it was in a country area that they lived, and this man was married to a German wife who had learned English from reading the paper. And I stayed there about a month, and then a man from a town called Livry-Gargan, I'd say about 14 miles from Paris, a crippled man. I later found out that he was from the Deuxième Bureau, which is a counter-espionage organization in Indochina. And he had been wounded. He had 3 plates in his head from bullet wounds. and he was paralyzed on the right side, but he still could ride a bicycle. So he rode the bicycle, and I just walked on the sidewalk, and he rode real slow so I could stay up with him. And we went to his house, and in Livry-Gargan, his father-in-law, who was the mayor, was also in the underground. And then we lived there for, I think, about a month. And I'd work, do things for them. And, oh, incidentally, the railroad man took me up in the mountains one day and showed me a cave. And in the cave was boxes of rifles and ammunition and stuff. And he said he had enough there for 3,000 men, and he had 3,000 men in his organization. And later on, when after the invasion, before the invasion, when I got to England, I had a message for the BBC to broadcast, that when it would be broadcast, it would warn him that the invasion was coming, and he would mobilize his 3,000 men. In any event, this guy, this crippled man, he headed up 3 organizations, and we combined them so that there was approximately 70 people on December 17th of 1943. There was approximately 70 people who were scheduled to go out in stolen German army trucks to the coast and be picked up by British submarines. But unfortunately, there must have been somebody who squealed, because the Gestapo captured all but 15 of the 70, and I was one of the ones that got away, and we made our way back into the town of Livry-Gargan by following the crippled man's sister-in-law. And when we got into Livry-Gargan, we went to the mayor's house, and he let us sleep in his barn that night. And next morning, we went out about 4 miles out into the country to the house of a school teacher, and he took our photographs. Of course, we lost our identity cards and all that, ration cards and things like that were all gone. So they had to change my name and give me a new ration card and a new identity card. And my original name was Edmond Larrier, and they changed it to Edmond Marou. And then we, from there, we went to Paris, and I stayed with a single man who had an apartment in one of the buildings, and I met, and there were several men from the underground who come up to visit with me, and one of them asked me if there was anything he could get me to take home as a souvenir. And I says, try to get me a bottle of Paris perfume. So he did, and one day this man come in and he asked us, was there anything we needed? And I said, well, we needed railroad tickets to Toulouse in southern France, because that was closer to the Spanish border. Well, somehow they got him, and they got us the tickets. And when we we took the train from Paris. Nobody bothered us there, but it was full of people, jammed with people in the aisles. But we had a compartment, and across from me was a German officer, a German soldier, and a French collaborator. We could tell he was a collaborator because he was so friendly with the Germans. And next to me was, on one side was a Polish man, on the other side was a Dutchman, and me in the middle, and I was pretending that I was sleeping all the time because the German soldier kept trying to start up a conversation with me. And so the train stopped about halfway, and the Gestapo agents got on to check their identity cards. And right at that time, I had to go to the toilet real bad, so I went out in the aisle, and it was so crowded I had to push my way through, and I bumped up against this woman, and she said, "Voulez-vous passer, monsieur?" And I said, "Oui, madame." And I went past her, and as I passed her, I noticed the Gestapo agents were in the compartment before mine, and I went on and rounded the corner, and as I rounded the corner where the restroom was, there was a man standing there, and when he saw me, he turned around and opened the door of the train and jumped off. And we were doing about 50 miles an hour. And I don't know what happened to him, but it probably wasn't good. Anyway, by the time I got back to my compartment, the Gestapo were in the compartment after me, so they didn't get to check my identity. And when we got to Toulouse, we were met by a Catholic priest, and he took us to an apartment building, and when we went in, we looked out the window, and here's several women down there, and they were pointing toward the building, and evidently they knew we had gone in there, and so he says he wasn't sure he could trust them. So he took me to another apartment building that was completely vacant, but on the first floor there was a pile of potatoes. On the second floor there was some carrots and turnips, and on the third floor was one of the apartments that they put us in. And come to find out, at lunchtime, the owner of that building, he also ran a restaurant near there, and he would come down every day and take us to lunch, and it was a big meal because it was the only meal we got, just one meal a day. And I guess we were there for almost a month, and spent most of our time just looking at the people going by out the window. And then we got, somebody bought us some railroad tickets down to a town called Dax, D-A-X. It's only about 40 miles from the Spanish border. And so when we got there, the town seemed deserted. But as we were walking down the street, we didn't have any instructions as what to do or who to meet. But as we were walking down the street, this man come along with a car and picked us up. And he started driving, and I was sitting in the back seat, and he says, "Any of you guys from Frisco?" And I said, "Well, I've been there." He says, "I used to run booze in Frisco." And here he's running airmen over the border into Spain. So he took me into the mountains just about as far as he could go by car. And we went, it was a farm, but it was in the forest where it was, the barns and everything. and that's where the road ended. And well, we went into this barn, and they gave us, they took our suitcases and gave us back sacks, and they had it supplied with a bottle of wine, about a 2-pound piece of cheese, and a loaf of bread, and for each one of us. And when we went into the barn, here up in the loft in the barn, there must have been 500 suitcases that they had taken from people and given them knapsacks instead. And so we started out, 21 of us. There was 3 Americans that I knew of, 5 Dutchmen, 2 Frenchmen. There was 6 Jews. There was a couple and their 2 teenage daughters. And then there was one old man that they called Rabbi. Now, I don't know if that was out of respect for his age or if he actually was a clergyman. Anyway, he was a very quiet fellow, but this great big fat Jew, he flashed the light for the ladies to go across the creek, and then we saw the lights flashing up the mountain. On the side of the mountain, it apparently was the lookout, and they had seen the flashlight down there in the creek. And so they had signaled people further on up that we were coming. So we had to change our route and go up to the tops of stay on the tops of the mountains. And that's where the snow was. It was all day in hip-deep snow. And 2 of the Frenchmen would go up ahead and break trail, and then the women would follow them, and then we'd bring up the rear, and then pretty soon we'd swap off and we'd break trail. And anyway, it was 2 nights and 3 days to make the crossing. And on the 3rd day, well, it was night, the 3rd day, about midnight, we crossed into Spain, and the Frenchmen started singing the Marseillaise. And I tried to quiet them down because I'd heard stories that the Spanish Border Patrol, the Carabinieri, were selling Americans back to the Germans for 25,000 francs. And I wanted to get further into Spain. I didn't want to mess with the policemen. Anyhow, they quieted down, and we kept going. And I got so tired and sick that I kind of laid down. And I told them, I'll catch up with you when I catch my breath. And this one Dutchman, come back, and he got the 2 French boys to pick me up, and one of the Dutchmen was the vice president of the International Aeronautical Association. I remember that. And the other Dutchman was had been chief of police of The Hague, and had done something against the Germans and was making his escape. Anyway, one of them gave me a drink of wine, and the other one gave me a pill. And I don't know what that pill was, but it kept me going. I got to going after that, and I was going strong an hour later. And it was about an hour into Spain. We come into a second town, and we went to a house and asked the woman to fix us some breakfast. And she did. And the man of the house, this was very early in the morning. I think we had to wake up the people. The man of the house got up and had the boy go out with the to get some wood for the fire. Well, when the boy come back, he come back with the local carabinieri, with the policeman. Only he didn't have his uniform on. And we introduced ourselves and shook hands all around, and he left. And about 10 minutes later, he come back with his uniform on and put us under arrest. And that was in, I don't know the name of the town, but it was one of the first towns in the mountains. It was very close to that, that real small town that's up in the Pyrenees Mountains. Anyway, he took us hiking for about 15 miles to a town called Lerida. And there they put us in jail, and there was bars on the windows, but there was no glass in the windows. And it was in February, so it was cool in there. And so we asked a boy walking by if he could get us some wine. And so he went and got us a bottle of wine, and we gave him 5 pesetas, which is equivalent to $5. And that's a lot of money to those people. And but when he come back, a woman was with him, and she had him by the ear, and she thought he had stolen the money. And so we asked her if she could get in touch with the military attaché at Barcelona. And so she didn't know what we were saying, and she went away with the boy. And a teenager, I'd say about 16, a young man, come over and asked us what we wanted, and we could communicate with him because the man, the bombardier, American bombardier that was with us, had a French-Spanish dictionary. So with that, we let him know that we wanted to get in touch with the military attaché in Barcelona. So he went away, and the following day, we saw this man coming up with a beautiful suit on, all dressed up and everything in a briefcase. And he was a Spanish lawyer, and he bailed us out of jail and took us over to the military attaché, who gave us 160 pesetas a week and a package of Lucky Strike cigarettes. And set us up in the best hotel in town. And we were there about a month. And then he come over one day and told us that Spain was about ready to break diplomatic relations with the United States. So if they did, he would get in touch with us, and we were to take off into the mountains and try to get to Portugal. And but a couple of days later, he come over, and he said he was going to try to get us out. And he took us by train to Madrid. And he says, we're not well liked in this country, but if the people even slap your face, don't pay any attention to them. Let them get away with it, because they'll probably kill you if they can. And we went to this restaurant, and I didn't know what to order, but I just pointed to the dish that the man next to me had, and they brought me the same thing. Well, when I was going to eat it, I took up a fork of it, and I thought it was spaghetti, but each one of the spaghettis had little eyes in them. It seems like as if it was some kind of a meal that they made out of baby eels. So I didn't eat that day. And so then we got back on the train, and after a little while, we got to Gibraltar. And that was, of course, British. And I had about 40 samples of various kinds of liquors in my backpack, and the British confiscated it. I don't know if they wanted it for themselves or if it was illegal to have it. Anyway, it was gone. And they said that they were trying to get us out, but they didn't know what to do. So we just spent our time roaming around the streets and in bar rooms. And one night in the bar room, I heard a Scotsman speaking French. Now, if you've ever heard a Scotsman speak French, it's the most atrocious sound I've ever heard. And anyway, I went over and introduced myself, and he was going to Scotland the following day. So I asked if I could go along, and he says, be there at 8 o'clock and you can go along. So I said, where do you refuel? Because he was flying a C-47. And he says, we fly it nonstop. And I said, you can't fly a C-47 to Scotland, it's too far away. And he says, well, we'll be in a bit of a fix, won't we? But come to find out, they had installed small tanks all the way out through the wings, and had doubled the range of the conventional C-47. So we landed at Prestwick, Scotland, and I took a train down to London where they interned me, and I had to get somebody from the 94th Bomb Group to identify me, because, and the fellow that identified me was the one whose place I took on the plane that we went down. And I went back to the 94th Bomb Group, and they had me telling of my experiences and how I escaped. I had to lecture a bunch of officers and men, and then they gave me $1,400 in British money, and I went down, and I took a train back up to Prestwick, Scotland, and I had a choice of waiting there and going by ship, which I didn't want to do, but I could just wait. And in 3 days, I got a flight to Iceland, and then another flight to Prestwick, Scotland, to Newfoundland. And from Newfoundland, we flew to Mitchell Field, New York City. And the first thing I did was to go into a restaurant and order a steak. And I ate the steak and then took a bus up to Holyoke, Massachusetts, where my family was. And when I got in town, it was 11 o'clock at night, and I was afraid to go home. So I took a couple of drinks, and the man next to me says, "You're one of the Tracy boys, aren't you?" My mother had 5 kids in the service, and I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I'm going to get you home before you get drunk." And come to find out, he was a next door neighbor. And so he took me home, and I banged on the door, and my mother said, come to the door and said, "Who is it?" And I said, "Jim." She says, "Oh my God," and she passed out. But my father caught her, and we went inside, and we sat around the kitchen table all night, it seemed, talking, and my sister says, "Did you get hit?" And I says, "Yeah." And she says, "I thought so." "Where?" And I said, "In the back of the head." And so after a while, I went to bed, and I had been given a 30-day leave from Mitchell Field. And when I get back, it seemed like they told us not to tell anybody about being with the French underground. But the man from the local newspaper come down, and he said that they had word that James Tracy, formerly reported missing in action, was now home on furlough. So they figured there was a story there, and they came down. Well, these same people had told me not to tell anybody, but here they go sending notice to the newspaper. But anyway, it come to find out, after 6 months, they were declaring you dead, no longer missing. So they had sent a letter to my mother saying that she could collect my life insurance. And she never did. My father says she never did apply for it because she said she didn't believe that I was dead, that she'd know about it if she was. She was a very superstitious Irish woman. And so after 30 days, I went back to Atlantic City, and they sent me down to Bury St. Edmunds. No, they sent me down to St. Petersburg, Florida, where I had 7 weeks of rehabilitation because I was psychoneurotic. Well, St. Petersburg was, they had come to the conclusion that I was psychoneurotic, and I told them I wasn't psychoneurotic. I'd been drunk for 7 months. That's why I was shaky. It seems that over in France, a lot of times we couldn't get food, but I could always find some kind of alcoholic beverage. And anyway, after 5 weeks, that was it, 5 weeks of treatment, and the treatment consisted of getting your blood pressure and your pulse taken every morning, and then you're released for another 24 hours, whereupon we went into town and got a quart of whiskey and sat in the bar room drinking from the bottle of whiskey and with beer. And after 5 weeks, the major says to me, "Well, my boy, that's all we can do for you." I says, "Well, sir, that's all you can do to me. I'm financially broke, I'm spiritually broke, I'm physically broke." And he says, "Well, you have one satisfaction. You can choose any place in the United States that you want to go." And I said, "Any place east of the Mississippi." So they sent me to Kansas. Apparently he'd missed out on his geography. But it was a good thing because Kansas at that time was a dry state, and to get any booze, we had to go up to Nebraska. But there was bootleggers in Kansas that used to get $17 a fifth for whiskey. Anyway, after a few months there, they shipped me to Walker Army Air Force Base in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So I was discharged, and that was in October of 45. 45, yeah. So that's it.
That's it, that's the story, that's a heck of a story.
Well,
There's a couple other things here too that maybe you're not aware of, John. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but I want you to talk to him again because
Okay.
we're on camera. But going back, actually, I'm going to, since we're kind of towards the end of your story, you talked about flying back from Scotland to Newfoundland and then on to the States. Why don't you describe to us? Why don't you describe to us what the flying boot is?
well, on the way to Newfoundland from Iceland, there was a major in back of me who had been on one mission, and we were flying a C-54, and the plane was designed so that the wings oscillated, and that would absorb any turbulence in the air. And I suppose it would do that for passenger comfort because it was a passenger plane. And but this major says, I don't care what kind of metal it is. You bend it enough and it's going to break. And here we were 9 hours over the Atlantic before we got to Newfoundland. And as we were approaching Newfoundland, there was a plane that landed, just flew underneath us and landed. And he landed too fast because he went down and off the end of the runway into the drink. And the plane didn't sink all the way, so it must have been pretty shallow. But anyway, that made the pilot nervous, so he went up and around again and landed and slammed on his brakes as soon as he landed. And it felt like as if we stopped within 25 feet, but of course that's not, it's more than that. But he did get it stopped very fast. So we didn't get a bath that day.
But you talked, when we talked to you the first time, you had mentioned that when you're on the flight, you were wearing a medal called the Flying Boot.
Oh.
Why don't you describe what the Flying Boot is?
The Flying Boot is a semi-official award. It's a decoration what we used to wear under our pocket on the left side, and it's a flying boot, a boot with wings on it, and it signifies that you flew over and walked back. Well, when I was flying down to Miami Beach, yeah, this brigadier general asked me, is that an official award, Sergeant? And I says, no, sir, it's semi-official. He says, well, what the hell is it? I says, it's a flying boot. It signifies I flew over and walked back. He said, oh, and went over and sat down.
I want to go back into France, where you were in Paris, and you talked a little bit about the situation where the 70 people tried to make the escape and only 15 were able to get away from the Gestapo. Was this at the Paris train station?
What was the question?
Just trying to at Paris when the group of 70 was trying to get out of France.
Yeah.
And you were able to get by. Was this at the Paris train station that this
Yeah.
was happening? And kind of describe what the sequence of what happened there.
Oh. before we went to Toulouse, um, we walked through the power station, railroad station, and there was the biggest man with a great big plaque on his chest with checking identity cards. And the man I was with said that we will try to go out through the bathroom window. And while we were heading toward the men's room, a French gendarme stopped me and said, qu'est-ce que ça dans votre paquet? And at that time, I didn't understand what he said, and I stuttered. And I think if he'd have asked me the question in English, I was so darn scared. I couldn't talk. I was just going. So the man that was with me told the gendarme that I was deaf and dumb. So he said again, pointed to the package I was carrying, a shoebox, and I just poked my thumbs down through the top of it and spread them apart. And fortunately, it was apples that showed up on top. And underneath the apples, I had a slab of bacon. And if he'd have seen that, I'd have been arrested for smuggling meat into Paris.
So at this point, did the Gestapo ever get a hold of you at any point when at the Paris?
No, they were very close, maybe about 10 feet from me, but they took the guy next to me instead of me. And just about that time, this real tall man come down the stairs and signaled, and the Gestapo agent, I guess, was busy at the moment. And so I went up to the tall man, and he took me to the home of a woman that we called Mrs. Boots, because she always wore these horse riding boots.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead if you want to.
I tell you what didn't come through real clear to me, Jim. That one mission when you were shot down, I think you told me that out of 84 B-17s in the air, you lost like 60.
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't tell us that, nor did you, we haven't talked about daylight.
Well,
Wait a minute.
that
What I'd like to hear from you is, I'd like to hear you talk about daylight bombing and the terrible risks that were involved and the terrible casualties that you suffered, including the 60 out of 84 planes.
Yeah, but you got to take into consideration, we had daylight bombing, yes, but we had at least 10 machine guns, and they can do a lot of damage. And each one of them was twin 50s. So you could put a lot of bullets in the air. And I can remember one I got, I got him, I saw him coming down out of the sun. It was a 109, and he was coming so fast that I couldn't keep up with him. So I spun my turret as fast as it would go and pulled the trigger, and he ran into the bullets. But well, we were supposed to have escorts, but we did have British planes, but they were slower than the 109s, and they only took us about 200 miles, no, not even 100 miles, 50 miles into France. And then they had to go back because they didn't have that much fuel. But later on, in 44 and 45, they had the escorts, the 51s, P-51, they had the escorts that would go all the way with them. And that's when they just about ruined the German Air Force.
So the fact that you didn't have any fighter escorts while you were going deep into Germany was a huge factor as to why your bombing missions were so dangerous.
Yeah, I know the first day that I was, let's see, it must have been a week or two after I was shot down that the Germans uh, broadcasted an English broadcast supposedly to Ireland that the American Air Force was crippled because of the loss of 80 planes on the Schweinfurt raid. And and the following day, the American Air Force sent 1,000 planes to Wilhelmshaven, and the day after that, they sent 1,500 planes to Berlin. Actually, the day I got shot down, there was 59 planes destroyed or shot down in enemy territory, and one plane was crash landed in England. So 60 out of 84 planes were eliminated. And later on, I got a San Francisco Examiner of that date, and it said that the president said it was a very costly raid, but it was worth it. And I'll tell you, there were 600 people that didn't think so.
Well said, yeah,
Yeah.
well said. Have you ever been back to France, Jim? You ever been curious
No.
about?
No, I always wanted to go to that town of Docks and, of course, visit with the people who had helped me. I did correspond with that girl that was a year older than me, and but she had some lung disease, and she was sick for quite a long time, and then she got well, and she wrote back to me, and we corresponded for several years, and then she stopped writing. Oh, incidentally, her father was executed by the Germans for his activities with the underground. But I assume that he had somebody to take his place, because in the Pathé News, on the day of the American invasion, there was countless civilians pinning the Germans down in Paris. So because the Germans had said that they were going to blow up Paris if there was an invasion. And to keep them occupied, it showed men in civilian clothes with guns shooting at people up in the hotel rooms or other office buildings and such as that. And the Germans did have Paris mined. They were going to blow it up, but they couldn't get to the equipment they needed to set it off. And I do believe, I trust that some of the 3,000 men that this guy had in his organization were among those who were in the street that day. I like to believe it, but this railroad man had given me a note to take to the British Broadcasting Company when I got to England. It said, "La roulante d'André est en parfaite santé." That's the mother-in-law of Andrew is in perfect health. And he said, if they will broadcast that 3 days in a row, I will know that the invasion is imminent, and I will organize my people and get them out, stopping the Germans wherever they can. And I carried the message in my cigarette lighter for quite a while, and then I got smart and I memorized it and tore it up and threw it away, because if I had been caught by the Gestapo, they probably would have gotten the message out of me.
You had told us before that there was one of the reasons why you didn't like speaking French around the Germans. There was a particular problem with how you spoke French. Could you describe what that was, especially when you were talking about being on the train with the German officer?
Well, it was quite common for a Frenchman, a loyal Frenchman, to ignore or even curse a German soldier or officer. And the Germans had been told to make friends with the French. And so you could abuse them verbally any way you wanted. I can remember a man asking me one day, "Würdest du für das Schweinefahrer?" Well, where's the car for the railroad station? And I knew what he said, but I just called him dirty, salut. And I expected he'd slap my face, but he didn't. And then it was, the Dutchman later on told me that it was quite common for a Frenchman to abuse the Germans and get away with it. I had the stroke a while back, and sometimes when you speak, I know what you're saying, I can hear you, but it don't
Just quite register first.
it don't register.
Well, you did it. You're doing a very good job, Jim.
Well,
Did you speak French with a particular accent?
yeah. One woman said, don't speak French in front of any Germans. Let somebody else do it. Because she said, you speak French like a Russian. And that's worse than an American. And I don't know, I thought I spoke pretty good French. But it wouldn't do for to speak like a Russian. Although it probably, we had Polish people with us. And that's one thing that I thought was awful strange. One Polish man had been a sergeant in the Air Force and had flown a fighter plane. And he was shot down by the Germans, and he said, I went to my father and got down on my knees and apologized for losing the war. And then I began escaping over several European borders, 7 altogether. He went over 7 borders to get to Africa. And he contacted the British in Africa, and they sent him to England, where they trained him as a fighter pilot. And they sent him on a mission, a leaflet mission to Paris, and he got shot down on his first mission. And he said, the biggest part of the plane I could pick up and carry with my hands. And he said, all I got was a sprained ankle out of it. And later on, we had a Polish officer who was a pilot. And they introduced him to the Polish sergeant who was a pilot, and he wouldn't even speak to him because the officers don't associate with the enlisted men. And I thought that was crude, pretty crude of him. I know, because when I got back to the States, my pilot, who had gone on and finished his missions, he took me out, and he bought me dinner and bought me drinks, and the following day, he said he'd been told that if he wants to associate with the enlisted men, do it at home. I don't want you doing it in public. How do you like that? The Americans were getting to be like the British or the Germans.
I think we can get it.
That's plenty, isn't it?
Yes.
Curious, did he ever mention what position he was on the
Oh,
aircraft?
yeah, we
Yeah, he
really
was
ought
the
to
gun
talk,
turret.
top turret. Now,
Top
we,
turret?
no,
Okay.
we
He
really,
did mention.
no, we probably ought to sit down just to ask a basic question about
Yeah.
the top turret gun and what the duties were there.
Then we'll be done.
You were also fire control, weren't you, Jim?
Okay,
Well,
describe first of all,
The,
top turret.
who's ever in the top turret is usually fire control, regardless of how much a general could be flying the plane, and he had to do what the sergeant tells him to do in combat when the shooting begins. And that's why this one time when the Focke-Wulfs were coming in at our nose, I yelled out, "Drop your nose." And he didn't drop the nose. And I have cutoffs to keep from shooting your own props off. I have cutoffs, so I can't shoot at these planes that are coming in. So when we got onto the ground, this captain says, "I could have you court-martialed for that, you know." And I says, "Well, why the hell didn't you drop your nose when I told you to?" And he says, "You could be court-martialed for that." And I says, "No, sir, I was fire control." I said, "Top turret is fire control unless you don't know it. And you're supposed to do what I tell you to do." I had them right in my sights and I couldn't shoot them because you wouldn't drop your nose. And he never did follow suit.
How many aircraft?
Well, I mean, it was a damn frustrating. I had my guns. I had two guns right on those three Focke-Wulfs that were coming in. And he wouldn't. All he had to do was do this. And just drop it an inch or two. Now,
Anyway,
Yeah, I think we better,
Yeah,
we better move on here.
we've got plenty. Jim, that's great.
Jim,
Yes.
thank you so much. That was a pleasure.
I hope you can use it.
That was a pleasure.
Can we use?
Let me help you up
Jeez.
here.